Darkness presses against the silk-draped walls, thick as blood, silent as death. You're not in a battlefield, but it feels like one. The air is sharp, heavy with the scent of sweat and iron. Behind the crimson curtains of the royal chamber, the screams of a young queen tear through the night like a curse clawing its way out of the womb. Her hands are clenched. Her jaw is locked. Her eyes, wide with terror, search the chamber for any sign of mercy. But find only the faces of men and women trained to look away. You hear it, the muffled prayers of the midwives, lips trembling as they whisper to the Virgin. You feel it, the tremor in the queen's bones, the betrayal of her own body. A child is coming, and something is wrong. She is 17. Her belly stretches taut beneath a sheet soaked in fear and expectation. Every woman in this court has been taught, if you bleed too much, you die. If the child is malformed, you are cursed. If it is not a boy, you are worthless. You feel the breath of the priest behind you, pacing, murmuring Latin against the candlelight. Not for protection. For purification. Just in case. The midwife's hand falters. There's something strange. Too large. Too slow. Too still. You hear her whisper to another, he's stuck. Another contraction rolls through like thunder. The queen screams again, but it's quieter this time. Not because it hurts less. But because she is slipping further from herself, deeper into something older than pain. Hours pass. Time breaks. The fire burns low. And then, squelching flesh, and a final cry not from the queen, but from the baby. No applause. No rejoicing. Just silence. The midwife doesn't raise him up. She holds him low. The shadows move across her face as she steps back, eyes fixed, not blinking. Another servant gasps. The chambermaid drops the cloth in her hands. Even the priest falters, his words lost in his throat. You lean closer. You want to see. But part of you wishes you hadn't. The head is too large. The jaw juts forward like a beast's. The tongue already lolls from a mouth that can't seem to close. His limbs twitch in odd rhythms, one too long, one too weak. Eyes roll. The stench is sour and strange. Not the smell of life. The smell of rot that hasn't yet begun. The queen lifts her head, weak and shaking. She asks for her son. No one answers. They're still staring. Not at a prince. Not at a savior. Not at a king-to-be. They're staring at a prophecy made flesh. A mother's womb had opened, not to life, but to omen. The queen, too exhausted to speak, watches the women back away slowly. She sees them cross themselves. She sees them mouth words she cannot hear. Her son is placed not in her arms, but at her feet. Somewhere in the palace, a bell rings. They will call him Charles. But not tonight. Tonight, they only call him what they see. It's not a boy. It's a beast. She was only a mother. A girl married into hell. If her story doesn't deserve to be heard, then whose does? Subscribe to Tale of History, so these voices never vanish again. You trace the blood backward. Not through love, not through fate, but through obligation, centuries of royal union sealed not by affection, but by decree. One cousin to another. One niece to an uncle. Sisters passed between brothers. Daughters promised to men who helped raise them. All in the name of power. All in the name of empire. This is not a lineage. This is a blueprint for collapse. The Habsburgs, rulers of a fractured world, had sewn their dynasty shut with golden thread, and strangled themselves in the process. You look at the family tree and it does not branch. It coils. It folds inward. And at its rotten center, born of generations of whispered compromise, is a boy with too much blood from the same source. The Habsburg jaw. That grotesque, protruding chin so often painted with flattery, now rendered in anatomical truth, jutting, misaligned, obstructive. Charles II couldn't chew. His tongue, too large for his mouth, often hung limp, dripping saliva as courtiers looked away. He spoke in slurs. Not because he was shy, but because his body couldn't form the words of a king. But that was only the surface. Inside, the damage was worse. Hydrocephalus. Fluid pressing against the brain. Epileptic episodes masked as divine visions. Episodes of incontinence. Sudden fevers with no cause. Charles was not just malformed, he was unstable. Bones underdeveloped. Muscles that never gained proper tone. He did not walk until he was 4. He did not speak clearly until he was nearly 8. His parents shared more than just a crown, they shared grandparents. His mother, Mariana of Austria, was his father's niece. And their child was the consequence of this union between blood too close to be clean. You trace the line again. Generation after generation, Philip marries his cousin. Their son marries his niece. That son marries his double cousin. And on, until the bloodline forgets how to breathe. In Charles's own family tree, over 80% of his ancestry can be traced to just 2 people. The same genes shuffled, again and again, until every flaw became a feature. Modern geneticists call it the coefficient of inbreeding. For most people, it's negligible. For Charles II, it was 0.25, the equivalent of a child born to a brother and sister. It wasn't myth. It was math. They had crafted him with science long before science had a name. He was never meant to thrive. He was bred to uphold a name, not survive it. His heart was weak. His genitals underdeveloped. His testicles, according to the autopsy, were atrophied. His seed, dry. His spine curved. His intellect inconsistent, like a candle flickering between wind and wax. The Habsburgs built empires across continents, but in the end, they could not build a single heir that wouldn't implode from the inside. They thought their blood was sacred. But it was diseased. They called it divine right. But it was congenital ruin. You want to look away. But you can't. Because in this boy's body is a century of decisions. A century of ambition. A century of incest painted in oil and gold leaf. Charles II was not a tragedy. He was an equation. A genetic ghost. And his birth was not a beginning. It was an ending, wrapped in velvet and crowned in silence. She was told he'd rule. But his body told another story. And now that you've seen what they tried to breed behind closed doors, you owe it to yourself to open the next one. Subscribe to Tale of History. Or tell us why this legacy should rot in the dark. He was born in a palace, but raised like a secret. You hear the echo of footsteps on cold marble as servants pass his chamber without knocking, without speaking his name. Behind the gilded doors of Madrid's Alcazar, a child stares at the ceiling, his mouth open, drool slipping from his lips into the pillow that's already stained from yesterday. His arms twitch without purpose. His legs, stiff and thin, dangle from the side of the bed like the limbs of a marionette that no one wants to move. They don't let him play with other children. They don't let him run, because he can't. They don't let him speak, because he doesn't. And when he tries, the words emerge slow, swollen, incomprehensible. His voice sounds like it doesn't belong to him. As if it's trapped behind the tongue he can't control. You imagine the chamber at night, curtains drawn, candles low, the smell of wax and linen thick in the air. His nurse rocks him even though he's 6. He clutches at her dress like an infant. But even she has begun to pull away when he makes strange noises in his sleep. When he groans without meaning. When he laughs and no one knows why. The tutors arrive each day, like penance. Latin, math, statecraft, lessons poured into a vessel that cannot hold them. They write their reports in guarded language. The prince struggles with abstract thought. He requires additional repetition. He shows signs of divine simplicity. But behind closed doors, they whisper the truth: he can't learn. He doesn't understand. This boy is broken. And the queen? She stops coming in daylight. Mariana of Austria, the same woman who screamed his name into the night as she brought him into the world, now visits only in silence. Late. Alone. Wrapped in black shawls like she's in mourning. She kneels by his bed, not like a mother, but like a sinner. She strokes his hair with one hand while the other clutches a rosary so tightly her knuckles bleed. She does not weep. She does not speak. She just watches him breathe. As if expecting him to stop. He tries to smile. She looks away. You can feel her mind unraveling. This was her purpose, to give Spain an heir. But what she delivered cannot rule. Cannot reason. Cannot even eat without choking. The court sees her not as a queen, but as a failure wrapped in pearls. In the hallways, men of power begin to move like shadows. Ministers and ambassadors pass messages folded in glove-lined hands. Who will inherit if the prince cannot live? Who will speak for him if he cannot speak? Who will fight for Spain if the heir cannot even sit up? A quiet plan begins to form. Not to remove him, but to work around him. A kingdom is built in preparation, not for his rule, but for his vacancy. They begin to write laws that name others regent. They make alliances that ignore his future. They speak of war as if he's already dead. But he isn't dead. He is sitting in a sunlit room, licking the edge of a silver spoon, watching dust float in the light like stars he will never name. He smiles when a dog barks in the courtyard. He claps when the bells toll. He laughs when his nurse drops a cloth. He is alive. But not the way they wanted. Not the way they needed. If he were born today, we'd treat him. We'd wrap him in care. We'd fight for his dignity. Back then, they treated him like a mistake. If you're still watching, why wouldn't you subscribe to Tale of History? What's stopping you from remembering him properly? The crown was too heavy for his head. Not metaphorically, physically. It pressed down on a skull still soft in places, a skull stretched by fluid and misshaped by ancestry. They propped him up with cushions. Dressed him in silks he didn't understand. Held his limp hand in the air as the archbishop declared him sovereign before God and man. 4 years old. He didn't speak that day. He stared. And when the choir began to sing, Charles flinched, confused by the noise, disturbed by the echo. The people cheered, but he didn't look at them. He didn't wave. He didn't move. He blinked slowly, and a long thread of saliva slid from his lip to the collar of his coronation robes. A nation bowed before him. But he couldn't stand. From that moment on, Spain would belong to a shadow. A ghost in flesh. A king in name only. Behind the velvet drapes of royal procession, the real power moved. Men of title and robes of state gathered like wolves in prayer. They crafted policies in his name. They signed declarations with his seal. They made war, forged peace, broke alliances, while the boy who supposedly ruled them clapped his hands at birds in the window. He sat on a throne flanked by lions, yet he feared thunder. He recoiled from music. He babbled during courtly rites and often soiled himself before the eyes of entire embassies. His ministers bowed deeply, but only because they were laughing behind their hands. They held his puppet strings tightly, his mother, his confessors, his inner council. And like any good puppet, he gave them exactly what they needed, the illusion of continuity, the figurehead of legitimacy, the body of a king without the burden of will. But outside those polished marble halls, Spain had no illusions. The people began to whisper. El Hechizado. The bewitched. They said he was cursed. That the devil had licked him in the womb. That his mother had sinned with a beast and born a half-human thing as punishment. The old women in the villages spoke of his jaw like it was a demon's mark. The farmers refused to name their sons after him. Midwives feared bearing children on the night of his birthday. And when crops failed or cattle were stillborn, they said his gaze had turned upon them. And in those days, curses weren't just tales. They were doctrine. The Inquisition took notice. Not of his reign, of his body. They opened their grim books and turned to passages not meant for medicine, but for possession. They measured the dimensions of his skull. They counted the number of teeth he had at birth. They recorded the strange sleepwalking episodes, the spasms, the fits of confusion, the mutterings in his chamber when no one else was there. It wasn't science. It was sorcery. The physicians remained silent. Because what could they say? That centuries of inbreeding had led to a neurodevelopmental crisis. That the king's tongue was too large because his chromosomes repeated themselves too often. That this was heredity, not hell. No one would believe them. Because it was easier, more convenient, more righteous, to believe the devil sat on the throne of Spain. And so they prayed over him. Exorcised him in secret. Lit candles in the corners of his bedroom and burned holy herbs beneath his sheets. And all the while, Charles blinked slowly, eyes clouded, lips trembling, unaware that the very church that crowned him now believed it must cleanse him. A boy, crowned too early. A man, ruled too late. A kingdom led by a body no one trusted, and a soul no one claimed. And what of the truth? It sat buried beneath silk and ritual, drowned in incense and power, waiting for history to exhume it. He could not read. He could not write. He could not rule. But still, they made him king. Because it was easier to crown a puppet than admit the strings were tangled long ago. You've seen the crown. You've seen the child. Now ask yourself, would you have stood and clapped for him? Or would you have whispered, like the rest? If you're still here, still listening, then you owe him more than silence. Subscribe to Tale of History. Or explain in the comments why his life should be forgotten like a bad omen. The bedchamber becomes a stage. And every night, the performance begins. Not of love. Not of desire. But of obligation. Of desperation. Of the slow, public death of a dynasty. Charles is told to marry. Not to choose, not to love, simply to obey. His ministers whisper it with urgency, his confessors frame it as divine duty. The kingdom cannot survive without a child. And he, they say, cannot survive without a kingdom. So he does what they demand. At age 18, he marries Marie-Louise of Orleans, young, beautiful, barely a woman herself. She arrives in Madrid draped in French silks and Catholic hope, unaware that she is not stepping into a marriage, but into a tomb. She tries. God knows she tries. They dine in silence. She smiles. He stares. She reaches for his hand. He flinches. The nights are long, and when she emerges in the mornings, she is paler than before, her step smaller, her gaze emptier. Courtiers glance at her belly. They count the days. They gossip about sheets and servants, and when nothing changes, they begin to blame. The queen must be cursed. The queen must be barren. The queen must not be trying hard enough. But the truth lies elsewhere. Charles cannot perform. His body, misshapen, exhausted, riddled with symptoms no one dared name, betrays him in the one role he cannot fake. He is unable to consummate. His hands tremble. His breath shortens. His organs fail him. And when Marie-Louise miscarries, twice, the whispers grow louder. Not about her. But about him. He is not a man, they say. He is an imitation. A king in costume. A husband in name only. Physicians are summoned to examine him. They prod. They measure. They question. They draw conclusions they dare not speak aloud. And still, he is expected to continue the ritual. Night after night. Under scrutiny. Under pressure. Under God. When Marie-Louise dies at just 26, childless, exhausted, and possibly poisoned, another woman is chosen. Maria Anna of Neuburg. German. Catholic. From a family known for fertility. A political vessel wrapped in lace. She arrives already bearing the weight of a kingdom. Her very body is a promise. Her womb, a treaty. But Charles does not change. He cannot change. And Maria Anna learns what Marie-Louise never said aloud, that no amount of perfume can mask the smell of decay. That no amount of prayer can restore a body collapsing from within. That being queen in this court means smiling while you die inside. She becomes bitter. Then resentful. Then cruel. She tells the court that Charles is possessed. That witches stole his seed. That he is under a spell. She blames sorcery because truth is more terrifying than fiction. Because accepting reality would mean the end of Spain as they know it. So they cast blame like dice, hoping someone, anyone, else will be found guilty. But in the dark, Charles still lies awake. He listens to the whispers through the doors. He sees the way the ambassadors look at him, like a dying tree that still hasn't fallen. He knows they are watching. Waiting. Reporting. Each day, his bed becomes a throne of judgment. Each morning without an heir, a failure written into the annals of Europe. The court becomes a theater of anatomy. Who touched him? Who saw him? What fluids were present? What was heard? What was not? Every gesture dissected, every silence loaded with political consequence. He doesn't ask to be left alone. He doesn't ask for mercy. Because somewhere, in the broken recesses of his mind, he still believes he is king. But his body tells another story. A story written in the bloodlines of centuries. A story that ends, again and again, with the same brutal truth: there will be no heir. Only echo. Only rot. Only Charles. He didn't ask to be king. He didn't even ask to live. Yet the world mocked him until the end. Subscribe to Tale of History, or explain in the comments why his suffering isn't worth remembering. The walls of the palace were still gilded. But outside them, Spain was crumbling. Not with a bang, but with a silence that stretched across mountains, across oceans, across the shattered breath of an empire that once called itself eternal. Charles sat on a throne, draped in velvet, surrounded by servants, fed by trembling hands. And watched, without understanding, as his kingdom died one piece at a time. The Netherlands gone. Naples bleeding. Sicily slipping from the grasp of Spanish control. The Americas groaning under rebellion, famine, rot. Ships returned half empty. Colonies teetered. Soldiers unpaid. Merchants drowned in debt. The silver that once poured into Madrid like liquid salvation had dried into dust. And still, he was king. The ministers blamed each other. The nobles sharpened their knives behind courtly smiles. The queen schemed in private, her family writing letters across borders, seeking German support. Foreign ambassadors circled like vultures, cloaking diplomacy in false warmth, while drafting secret pacts behind closed doors. Charles was no longer a ruler. He was a carcass that still breathed. And everyone wanted a piece of what remained. In the corners of his court, whispers no longer hid. They spilled into the halls. Into salons. Into sermons. The king would die, soon, surely. And with no heir, no strength, no legacy, what would become of Spain? France sharpened its claws. Austria circled. England watched. All waiting for the same thing, his final breath. Not because they hated him, but because he was the key. And his body, once mocked, now became the most valuable corpse in Europe. His council split in factions, one backing the Bourbon claim, another backing the Habsburgs. Each day, the court played a different game of loyalty. Every smile was a lie. Every toast was a calculation. Every act of kindness, an audition for the world that would come after Charles. And all the while, the king, now bloated, half-blind, and barely coherent, sat in rooms filled with incense and superstition, still believing he had time. He still signed decrees, though few were enforced. He still blessed ministers, though none served him. He still prayed for an heir. But the empire he ruled no longer existed, not truly. It was an echo in cathedral halls, a ghost clinging to ruined ports, a memory drawn on fading maps. He had become the symbol of Spain's decay. Not its cause. Its reflection. They said the empire rotted with him. But the truth is darker. It rotted through him. He was not just its end. He was its proof. Now tell me, does this look like power? Does this sound like majesty? This was the man they crowned. This was the world they left him. And if you're still watching, if you're still breathing in this silence they built around him, then you know the cost of forgetting. Subscribe to Tale of History, before history forgets itself. Or explain in the comments why this slow, quiet ruin doesn't deserve to be told. There are no more ministers in the chamber. No more royal decrees. No more counsel, no more strategy. There is only Charles. And shadows. He begins to speak in whispers. But not to the living. At first, they think he's praying. Mouthing Latin to forgotten saints, calling on the Virgin for healing. But the words twist. Names are repeated, names long buried. He talks to his dead brother. To his first wife. To kings who ruled a century before his birth. He reaches toward empty corners of the room, fingers trembling, eyes wide, lips curled in strange delight. Sometimes he weeps and begs for mercy. Other times, he laughs, a deep, broken sound, like a child mimicking joy. They say he sees things no one else does. He says they visit him. He tells his confessor that a black figure sits on the edge of his bed each night. That something breathes in his ear. That there's a woman in the ceiling, smiling with no eyes. He hears bells no one rings. He smells sulfur where there is only candle smoke. The court doctors retreat behind silence. They know there is no medicine for this. But the priests step forward. With relics. With salt. With incense and iron. They do not announce it. But they perform it. An exorcism. The most powerful man in Spain, its monarch, its son of God, its living emblem of empire, is laid on a stone floor, surrounded by chanting clergy, who pray not for his soul, but against the devils they believe have taken root in it. And Charles lets them. Because he no longer knows the difference between himself and the shadows he fears. At night, he wakes screaming. During the day, he forgets where he is. He calls servants by the names of dead relatives. He asks for rooms that no longer exist. He questions why he has no sons, then, moments later, insists he remembers raising them. His memory collapses in on itself, piece by piece, like a palace with hollow walls. His counsel, fractured, paranoid, exhausted, begins to weigh the unthinkable, remove him. Declare him unfit. Hide him away. Rule in his name, but keep his face from the public. A king who breathes but does not command. But there is no heir. No clear successor. No lineage left unspoiled. Removing Charles means inviting war. So they do nothing. They wait. They feed him lies and prayers. They place relics beneath his mattress. They light candles that never go out. They swaddle him in religion and routine, hoping each day will not be the last, but sometimes hoping it will. His body, now swollen and pale, is a cage. His thoughts, scattered like ash. Even his mind wasn't his own. Even his soul was held hostage. You've watched this far. Felt the weight of this history. Breathed its dust. So what's the point of digging up these forgotten lives, if we bury them again with indifference? Subscribe to Tale of History. Or don't. But tell us why in the comments. Tell us why a man like Charles should be remembered with silence. He dies in a room where the curtains are never drawn. Where candles are kept lit through the day because light must be constant, lest the shadows return. Charles lies on a bed he no longer recognizes, beneath a crucifix he can no longer name. His body is swollen, rigid, pale as old wax. His breath rattles low in his throat, dragging like chains across marble. He doesn't know who sits beside him. He doesn't ask. His hands no longer grip. His eyes no longer blink. And still, they wait. The court physicians do nothing. There is nothing left to do. The queen kneels at the foot of the bed with dry eyes and clenched fists. A priest mutters the final rites. Outside the door, guards listen for silence. Then, just past midnight, he exhales. Once. And never again. A single sound escapes from the queen, sharp, quiet, unnameable. Charles II is dead. He is 38 years old. No heir. No legacy. No more kings of his blood. When the body is taken to be examined, the report reads more like an exorcism than a diagnosis. One atrophied testicle. A heart the size of a walnut. Lungs filled with rotted fluid. A blackened brain, soft and shriveled. His intestines twisted. His body riddled with deformities that had long outlived the myths they inspired. He was not bewitched. He was broken. And now, so was Spain. The court falls into mourning, but not for grief, for performance. Black banners are hung. Bells toll. Masses are spoken in every city. But behind closed doors, ministers draw maps. Generals sharpen blades. Ambassadors send urgent letters across borders. Because with Charles gone, the throne is empty. And the world is hungry. The War of Spanish Succession begins, almost instantly. France and Austria, England and the Dutch, all tearing at what remains of an empire that could not bear the weight of its own blood. Thousands die. Children drafted. Towns razed. Treaties shredded. All because no one could decide who should wear a crown that had already ruined its last owner. And what of Charles? His name is buried beneath the war. His body entombed beneath stone. But his face lingers. In portraits that never smiled, in letters that never praised him, in the echo of a dynasty that ruled the world and left it in ruins. This was not just the death of a man. It was the death of a bloodline. Of an idea. The end of kings who believed their thrones were divine, their blood immortal. All because a broken boy was forced to be king. And you've seen what they left behind. So what do we do with stories like this? Do we forget? Do we turn away? Or do we remember? Subscribe to Tale of History. Before the silence returns. She wakes to find the palace quiet. Not the stillness of peace, but the vacuum of abandonment. No one knocks at her door. No one brings fresh ink for letters. No one bows anymore. The king is dead. And with him, her purpose. Maria Anna of Neuburg, once crowned Queen of Spain, once paraded through the streets beneath arches of roses, now walks the halls like a ghost who hasn't yet realized she's passed. The servants avoid her eyes. The court has turned inward. The throne, empty. And she, worse than widowed. She is irrelevant. They whisper that she brought no heir. That she failed where queens are made and unmade. That her womb was as barren as the empire she married into. That she clung to a broken man not out of love, but for power, and when that power died, so did her voice. But none of them know what it cost her. They never saw her hands tremble each night she entered his room. They never saw her kneel behind closed doors, praying not for a son, but for strength to stay beside a man whose mind was vanishing before her eyes. They don't speak of the isolation. The slow starvation of being a queen to a man who could not love, could not lead, could barely speak. They don't mention the rituals, the humiliations, the exorcisms whispered through the floorboards while she pretended not to hear. Instead, they call her cursed. Cold. Irrelevant. And her name begins to fade. Like Marie-Louise before her. Like so many women before them. The history books file her under failure. Her portraits are pushed to storage. Her letters, discarded. Her final years, lived in quiet exile, forgotten even by the country she tried to save through the one thing that ruined her. A womb that did not produce a savior. But the truth? It was her body that bore the final breath of a dying line. It was her mind that endured the slow decay of a cursed crown. It was her voice that went unheard beneath the thunder of collapsing empire. And when she died, alone, discarded, embalmed without ceremony, they still called her the woman who birthed a beast. But it was never the child. It was the system. The court. The silence. The bloodlines. She was the queen. But not even history protected her. And if we're silent now, if we don't speak their names, they win again. Subscribe to Tale of History. Say her name louder than the silence. He was never the beast. He was the mirror. Held up to a world too proud to look at itself. From the moment he first cried, weak and confused, he was marked. Not as a son, not as a soul, but as a malfunction. A symbol of divine punishment. A living sermon on the dangers of pride and flesh. They blamed demons. They blamed queens. They blamed witches in the walls and curses in the blood. But they never blamed themselves. Because if they did, they would have seen what we see now. He was not bewitched. He was bred. Modern science doesn't whisper of possession, it shows the truth. DNA doesn't lie the way courtiers do. The medical journals explain it in cold, clinical language: excessive homozygosity, chromosomal saturation, hereditary metabolic disorders. A body built on centuries of repetition. A mind bent under the pressure of expectation and defect. Charles II of Spain was not a monster. He was a child. Born into madness. Raised in silence. Destroyed by design. They gave him a crown instead of a childhood. A throne instead of treatment. A kingdom instead of care. And when he failed to become what they needed, when he couldn't lead armies or sire heirs or deliver miracles, they punished him for the crime of being exactly what they had made. Not even history weeps for him. It ridicules. It edits. It forgets. But his suffering did not vanish with his breath. His story remains. Etched in bone, in parchment, in the long shadow of a dynasty that thought itself untouchable. And the question still lingers: what happens when we demand greatness from those who were never given the choice to simply live? What happens when we build thrones on sickness, crowns on coercion, and legacy on the broken bodies of children? You know the answer. Because you've heard his story now. Not the one carved into monuments. The one buried in silence. The one that asks, who was the real beast? And who, exactly, made him? Subscribe to Tale of History, and keep listening. Because the past isn't dead. It's just waiting for someone to finally understand it.